It's hot. But at least this keeps the mosquitoes off. Is something wrong?
Hello all my lovely neon peeps. It will be Halloween very soon, and on Neon Nightmares, that means it's time to get scarier, bloodier, and more brutal. Which brings me to the film we're going to be talking about tonight. But I will need to give you a little disclaimer here before we start the intro proper. And I'm sorry, but this one is very necessary. I am going to need to give you a hard trigger warning for this one. We're getting bloodier and more brutal tonight, remember? So naturally, we are going to be discussing several themes and situations that many people would consider triggering. Things so heinous, I can't even really mention them by name on YouTube. Things like, Jesus Christ, I can't even say the word. So from here on out, I will be using code words, stealthily. Code words such as, you know what? Why don't I have Jonah Hill help me out here?
It rhymes with shmushmorshin.
Yes, thank you. That. I will also be referring to the byproducts of shmushmorshins as schmieduses, shmushmorshin, schmiedus, schmorcher, things of that nature. Consider this your trigger warning. Now, let us continue. Now, if you are a rabid, horror-obsessed, horror movie fanatic like myself, chances are very good you've heard of the television series Masters of Horror. For the rest of you who haven't heard of it, please allow me to tell you a story. The year is 2002, and a television producer by the name of Mick Garris was also a horror lover. The difference between him and I, though, is that he had high-profile Hollywood horror royalty friends. Friends like John Carpenter, Tobe Hooper, Stephen King, and the list goes on. And he would often invite these friends to have dinner. These were pretty lavish dinners, but the food wasn't the interesting part. The guest list to these dinner parties was the real interesting thing here. Imagine sitting at a table with Wes Craven, Guillermo del Toro, Dario Argento, Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, and so on. Of course, these weren't just friendly dinners. Garris had an ulterior motive. No, not an orgy. He had an idea. He wanted to produce a television series he called Masters of Horror, a horror anthology series that would utilize the talents of some of the best horror filmmakers in the business. Sounds like a great idea, right? But wait, it gets better. Harris basically told these horror masters that his objective was to push the envelope as far as it could go regarding violence and gore. Do I have your attention now? Of course I do. At the time, Garris was pitching this series to pay-per-view channels like HBO, Showtime, and Cinemax. Channels where there are no advertisers, and where there are no advertisers, there are no censors. Basically, Garris had a bold vision. To create the most hardcore, violent, bloody, gory horror anthology series ever made. Did he succeed? Yes. However, unfortunately for him, extreme violence doesn't always translate to extreme quality, but that's just my opinion. Moving on. You see, as I said before, Garris was talking to heavy hitters of the horror world to flesh out the 13 episodes they had planned. Tobe Hooper, John Carpenter, and so forth. But you can't just fill your team with Jordans. Jordans are too expensive. You need some Scottie Pippens and Horace Grants, in the interest of saving money. No offense, Scottie P. You were always my favorite. Anyway, Garris was also talking to lesser-known filmmakers to fill out the roster. Brad Anderson, Tom Holland, Don Coscarelli. He also turned his attention towards an international filmmaker, a director who was making a name for himself, gaining a reputation for being a risk-taker and troublemaker, a man we've talked about before on this channel. I am, of course, talking about the great Takashi Miike, the guy who's responsible for this. And don't be surprised. The man's personally directed over 120 films. Probably 50% of my content is going to be based around his movies going forward. I could have very accurately called this channel the Takashi Miike channel, but I decided to go with Neon Nightmares instead. Moving on. Miike seemed to be the perfect fit for Masters of Horror. Garrus wanted to push the envelope, and Miike was known for pushing the envelope off a cliff. It was a match made in heaven. But, and this is a big but, Miike was too hardcore even for the ultra-hardcore Masters of Horror series. And that brings me to tonight's film. You see, it turns out telling a man known for some of the most disturbing cinema on the planet that he should push the envelope probably isn't the best idea, because Miike-san's contribution, called Imprint, ended up being the only episode banned from broadcast. And since Showtime was a pay-per-view channel where there really aren't many censors, that's pretty impressive. As a matter of fact, if you're a filmmaker sitting in a room with the creator of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Last House on the Left, and they're telling you to tone it down, well, I would consider that one hell of a flex. And something tells me that's exactly the way Miike feels about it. Imprint had a scheduled air date for January 27th, 2006, in Showtime's primetime slot, but after the producers caught wind of what was in it, it was quickly and quietly shelved. Garrus actually fought for the episode to be aired, provided they made some cuts, but even with the edits they would not allow it to see the light of day. So Garrus had to regrettably call Miike on the phone and give him the bad news. I don't know exactly what was said, but I imagine it went something like this. Hey, Miike-san, how's it going? It's Mick Garrus. Yeah, I like to try out new hairstyles. Anyway, I just got your episode of Masters of Horror. Kini irimashita ka? I loved it. I loved everything about it. The 5-minute scene, the fetuses thrown around like trash. Fun for the whole family. But there's some producers out here that don't feel the same way I do. They actually wrote down a question here on a piece of paper. Let me see if I can find it. It's a little question for you. Okay, here it is. Are you out of your goddamn mind? Yeah, bye. So without further ado, let's see what all the fuss is about. The episode begins with an atmospheric and beautiful aesthetic. Several men are enjoying an evening boat ride on a calm river. And real quick, I'd like to provide some context. Context in the form of a history lesson. I know, history is boring. You suck! But this history lesson will be interesting, I promise. Not interesting in a history is fun kind of way. No, interesting in a morbid, why the f*** were human beings so cruel and horrifying throughout history kind of way. Because I am going to be talking about the Meiji period of Japan. Those of you Japanese history buffs already know what I'm talking about. You see, Imprint is a period piece set in the Meiji period of Japan. What is the Meiji period? Glad you asked. The Meiji period was a notoriously cruel and horrifying era in Japanese history. Unkind to almost everyone who lived through it, but particularly unkind to women. Now, it is often theorized by critics and fans that Takashi Miike is a feminist. And that is because generally when Miike-san is given creative control over his projects, he tends to want to tell stories that shine a light on periods in history or parts of society that treat women unfairly. And the Meiji period is a perfect backdrop for such a story. The year is 1868, and Japan has just opened up its borders to foreigners. You have to remember that before this time, Japan was under the Tokugawa shogunate's Sakoku policy, a 200-year lockdown that banned most foreign contact and trade, isolating the country to preserve its feudal order. The Meiji period, starting in 1868, marked the fall of that system and the rise of Emperor Meiji, who pushed Japan into rapid modernization to compete with Western powers. You see, in those days, Japan was terrified of colonization, so the government centralized power, built railroads, factories, and a modern military, and adopted Western tech and laws to avoid it. Sounds cool, right? Not so fast. Rural communities, especially in places like Kyushu, faced crushing taxes and poverty as land reforms favored elites. Some things never change. For many, especially women, this meant exploitation. Girls, some as young as 10 years old, were sold to pay family debts, sent to brothels in Japan or abroad as karayuki-san. But wait, it gets better. Mabiki, I can't really explain what that means, hopefully the words on the screen are clear enough for you to see, was common in poor villages where families desperate to save resources culled their infant girls, seen as less valuable than boys, and sent them to be disposed of in the river like garbage. Hopefully you see now why that trigger warning in the beginning was necessary. The backdrop for Imprint is an island. It's not stated where the island is, but it's theorized by fans and critics to be a stand-in for the Amakusa Islands off Kyushu's coast. A remote hellhole where Meiji's darkest sins and secrets, like Karayuki-san trafficking and Mabiki disposals, ran rampant. Now, with the boring history lesson out of the way, let's continue. As I was saying, the episode starts with an American man, our protagonist, being ferried to the Amakusa Islands. And right away, one of the biggest problems of this film reveals itself.
Stranger, is true you are all hung like horses?
Mainly that both the director and actors don't speak English, yet the episode is completely in English. I love this film, but I can't ignore how jarring this feels to me, mainly because most of the cast speak English pretty badly. I honestly would have much preferred if the episode was in Japanese. I mean, they're in Japan, Meiji-era Japan. No one, and I mean no one, would speak English in Japan at that time, save for a small handful of people. But whatever, let's just power through it. The American man in the boat is Christopher, a journalist from America searching Japan for his long-lost love. Sounds romantic, right? Well, this is a Takashi Miike film, so I assure you it is not. Anyway, the boat runs into something in the water. The ferryman checks to see what it is, and it's the floating corpse of a pregnant woman. The camera lingers on the woman's corpse for a good long while. All of the men stare, making indifferent and callous remarks. FYI, there is a slight twist in the end. I want you guys to remember this scene. It will be important later. We then arrive at the island, and man, is it pretty. I mean, it's horrifying and cruel, and the Karayuki-san are all locked in cages like animals, but it's all photographed in this very unique and beautiful way. Perhaps I'm biased, my favorite color is red. If there is one thing I love about this film, it is the atmosphere. The colors, the sounds. Right away you're hit with this ominous, malevolent feeling. Women locked in cages, depraved men running to buy them. The imagery hits you so hard and fast, you barely know what's going on, but then you start to make sense of it. And then you're horrified. And if you're a viewer who has no knowledge of Japanese history, you'll wonder if this is historically accurate. Well, I'm here to tell you, it is frighteningly historically accurate. Christopher looks around at all the girls, and none of them strike his fancy, so he readies himself to move on. He's all set to leave until a tiny syphilitic host convinces him to stay the night and then continue his search in the morning. We're then introduced to a Karayuki-san known only as the woman. Please note the beautiful foreshadowing on display here. It is absolutely gorgeous. The woman is to be Christopher's entertainment for the night. Actually, hold on 1 second. Check this out. A lot of foreshadowing going on right here in the beginning of the episode. Sometimes it's a little jump scary. Sorry about that. We then get a voiceover of Christopher telling us that he fell in love with a Japanese girl at a brothel he met years ago. Her name was Kamomo. When he left her, he promised he'd return and take her to America so they could live happily ever after. But when he returned to that brothel, she'd been sold off. And he spent the last few years looking for her with no luck. And now, he's tired. Enter the woman. I'd like to pause for a second and briefly tell a scary story. Not just any scary story, but a story that is very much in the spirit of the themes we'll be discussing in tonight's episode. Sorry for the pause, but what's a Halloween special without a spooky story, right? This is the story of Futakuchi Onna. In the year 1800, in Edo's pleasure quarters, an urban legend was born. Once upon a time, a woman lived in poverty. She was married to a miserly man who refused to feed her, hoarding food for himself. She starved in silence, her body wasting away, but her suffering grew into something supernatural. One night, her head split open, and a second mouth formed on the back of her skull with sharp teeth and a writhing tongue. Her dark hair moved like living ropes, grabbing food from the house, rice, fish, anything it could find. The mouth spoke, demanding more, its voice harsh and guttural. It cursed her husband, blaming him for her hunger. The woman tried to hide it, binding her head with cloth, but the mouth never stopped eating or speaking. The villagers heard it whispering at night, and food vanished from their stores. They feared her, calling her a yokai, a creature born from pain and neglect. She was no longer just a woman. She was Futakuchi Onna, the two-mouthed woman, cursed to carry her hunger forever. Wasn't that fun? I hope you enjoyed it, but I've got a little plot twist of my own for you guys. I'm stopping things here. Yeah, this is a two-parter. Part 2 will be dropping on Halloween night. Yes, this is the way I do things when I do special episodes. You'll just have to forgive me. So make sure to tune in on Halloween night for the thrilling conclusion of the Imprint review. Until then, thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a comment and a like. Don't be afraid to subscribe if you like what you saw here, and I'll see you guys at the video store.